At my sister's wedding reception, my mother announced, "I need everyone to know that Melissa has always been my biggest disappointment." She said it right into the microphone during the toast for my sister Bethany's wedding while 200 guests sat frozen with champagne glasses in the air. I was standing by the cake table when she pointed at me and continued, 28 years old and still renting a studio apartment while her sister just married a surgeon. The wedding coordinator tried to take the microphone, but my mother pulled it away. Bethany got into Yale and Melissa went to state school. Bethany runs marathons and Melissa can barely run to catch the bus. My new brother-in-law Mateo stood up to intervene, but my mother wasn't done. I have 3 daughters and 2 of them make me proud every single day. Can you guess which one doesn't? My youngest sister Julia was filming the speeches for Bethany and her phone was still recording. My Aunt Helen tried to grab my mother's arm, but she brushed her off. You want to know something else? Last summer at the family reunion, Melissa was the only one who didn't help with Grandma when she fell. She just stood there. That was a lie and everyone who was there knew it. I was the one who called 911 while my mother screamed and my sisters froze, but I kept my mouth shut because arguing would make it worse. My dad finally got to the microphone and wrestled it away while apologizing to the guests. My mother walked straight toward me with her wine glass still in hand. You're ruining your sister's day by making this about you. She said it loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I haven't said a word. I replied quietly. Your presence is enough. Look at you in that cheap dress from Target. Your sisters wore designer gowns. The dress was actually a gift from Julia, who bought it at a boutique, but my mother didn't care about facts when she was on a tear. That's when my Uncle Richard walked over. He'd been watching from the bar and his face was red, but not from drinking. That's enough, Louise. You're embarrassing yourself. My mother turned on him immediately. This is family business, Richard. Mind your own. But Richard didn't back down. Melissa is family. And you've been doing this to her since she was 8 years old. The mention of age 8 made my mother's face change. Several relatives suddenly looked uncomfortable. We agreed never to discuss that. My mother hissed at Richard. You agreed. The rest of us just watched you torment one kid while spoiling the other 2. Richard was Dad's brother and had been at every family event for 30 years. Bethany walked over in her wedding dress trying to calm everyone down. Please, can we just enjoy the reception? This is supposed to be my special day. My mother immediately softened for her. Of course, sweetheart. I was just trying to give a loving toast. Julia stopped recording and walked over to me. I got everything she said on video, she whispered. I've been recording her outbursts towards you for 3 years. That surprised me because Julia usually stayed neutral in family drama. Why? I asked her. Because what Richard said is true. She's been doing this since Bethany was born when you were 8. You became the scapegoat the moment she had a second daughter to compare you to. My dad appeared then looking tired. Melissa, can we talk outside? I followed him to the parking lot where he lit a cigarette, which he only did when extremely stressed. Your mother is sick, he said finally. She has been for years, but she refuses to get help. The doctors think it's narcissistic personality disorder triggered by postpartum psychosis after Bethany was born. This was the first time anyone had admitted something was actually wrong. She fixated on you as the bad one and Bethany as the golden child. Julia came later and got labeled the peacemaker. Once she created those roles in her head, she couldn't see you any other way. I asked why no one ever intervened. We tried. Your grandparents threatened to cut her off if she didn't get therapy. She went twice, then said the therapist was incompetent. Your Aunt Helen tried to take you for a summer, but your mother called the police and said Helen kidnapped you. Everything suddenly made more sense. The pool incident when I was 12 where she pushed me in fully clothed, then told everyone I jumped. The time she donated all my college acceptance letters to my sister's schools before I could respond. The birthday parties she threw for my sisters on my birthday saying they deserved double celebrations. The wedding toast was her worst public display yet. My dad continued. But there's something you don't know. Bethany and Julia have been meeting with me and a lawyer for 6 months. We're doing an intervention next week. If she refuses treatment, we're all cutting contact. I couldn't believe my sisters were standing up for me after years of silence. We went back inside where the reception had resumed awkwardly. My mother was sitting alone at the head table because even her sisters had moved away from her. Bethany pulled me aside and handed me an envelope. Open it later. I stood in the parking lot watching the smoke from Dad's cigarette twist up into the dark sky. The reception noise felt far away, even though we were only 50 feet from the building. Dad took another drag and looked at me with tired eyes. They've been planning this for 6 months, he said quietly. Meeting with a therapist, gathering evidence, building a case for why your mother needs intensive treatment. 6 months felt like forever and no time at all. 20 years of this, and my sisters finally decided to act. I didn't know if I should feel grateful they were doing something or angry they let it go on this long. Part of me wanted to scream at Dad for waiting until Mom humiliated me in front of 200 people. Another part just felt numb. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked. Dad dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his shoe. The therapist said we needed to present a united front first. If we brought you in too early and you reacted, your mother might have found out and sabotaged everything. That made sense, but it still hurt. Julia appeared at the parking lot entrance looking for us. She walked over quickly and touched my arm. Can I talk to you for a second? Dad nodded and moved away to give us space. Julia pulled me toward her car parked in the far corner. I need to explain about the videos, she said. I started recording 3 years ago at your 25th birthday dinner. Remember that night? I remembered. Mom had spent the entire meal comparing my life to Bethany's medical school acceptance. Every course came with another comment about how Bethany was achieving great things while I worked a basic office job. Julia had sat there quietly like always, and I assumed she agreed with Mom. I was sitting across from you watching Mom tear you apart for 2 straight hours, Julia continued. You just sat there taking it, and I realized this was never going to stop unless someone documented it. So I started recording every family event on my phone. Every holiday, every dinner, every casual visit where Mom went after you. She pulled out her phone and showed me a folder labeled with dates. There were dozens of video files. I knew if we ever tried to confront her, she'd deny everything or claim we were exaggerating. But video doesn't lie. I stared at the phone screen. 3 years of evidence. 3 years of Julia watching and recording while I suffered through every event. Why didn't you say something? Julia's eyes filled with tears. Because I was scared. Mom's rage is terrifying and I didn't want to become her target. I know that's cowardly, but I was only 22 when I started recording. I'm not making excuses, but I want you to understand. I was trying to help in the only way I felt safe. We stood there in the parking lot and I didn't know what to say. The anger and gratitude mixed together until I couldn't separate them. Julia was still my little sister who'd been living in the same broken system. We should go back inside, I finally said. Julia nodded and we walked toward the building together. The reception had resumed, but the energy felt wrong. People were talking too loudly and laughing too hard like they were trying to erase what happened. Mom sat alone at the head table staring at her wine glass. Even her sisters had moved to other tables. Bethany saw me come in and walked over. She was still in her wedding dress looking beautiful and sad. Can we talk tomorrow? She asked quietly. Mateo and I are staying at a hotel tonight for the honeymoon send-off, but I want to see you after we get back in the morning. I agreed, because the envelope she'd given me earlier was sitting in my purse and I hadn't opened it yet. Bethany squeezed my hand and went back to her new husband who was watching Mom nervously from across the room. I said goodbye to a few relatives and left before Mom could corner me again. The drive home took 20 minutes and I spent the whole time replaying the toast in my head. Every cruel word, every comparison, every lie about the family reunion. My studio apartment looked exactly the same as when I'd left it that morning, but somehow it felt different. Mom had mocked this place in front of everyone, called it proof of my failures. But it was mine and I paid for it myself and there was nothing wrong with that. I sat on my bed and finally opened Bethany's envelope. Inside was a check for $15,000 made out to me. Behind it were 3 pages of handwriting and a printed document. I unfolded the letter and started reading. Bethany's handwriting was neat and careful. Dear Melissa, it began. I'm writing this because I don't trust myself to say everything I need to say out loud without breaking down or backing out. I've been in therapy for 2 years working through my own guilt and complicity in Mom's treatment of you. My therapist helped me understand that I benefited from a system that hurt you, and staying silent made me part of the problem. The letter went on for 3 pages. Bethany listed specific incidents where she'd watched Mom abuse me and said nothing. The pool incident when we were kids where Mom pushed me in fully clothed, then told everyone I jumped. Bethany wrote that she saw the whole thing and knew Mom was lying, but she backed up the lie because she was scared. The college acceptance letters that Mom donated before I could respond. Bethany admitted she knew where the letters were and could have saved them but didn't. The birthday parties Mom threw for my sisters on my actual birthday. Bethany said she felt guilty every time but never spoke up because she liked being the favorite. I understand if you can't forgive me. The letter ended. I spent 20 years accepting benefits that came at your expense. The favoritism, the money, the praise, all of it was built on making you the scapegoat. I'm trying to change and make amends, but I know that doesn't erase the damage. The check is for $15,000, which is exactly what Mom spent on my wedding dress and veil. It's symbolic restitution for years of financial favoritism. I hope you'll use it for something that makes you happy. I set the letter down and picked up the printed document. It was labeled Intervention Timeline and dated back to April, 6 months ago. The document showed regular meetings between Dad, Bethany, Julia, and a family therapist named Rita Chamberlain. The plan was detailed and specific. They would gather evidence of Mom's behavior. They would confront her as a united family. They would offer her a choice between intensive treatment at a specialized facility or complete estrangement from her daughters. They would support each other through whatever happened next. I read through the timeline twice, trying to process everything. My family had been planning this intervention for half a year while I went to dinners and holidays, having no idea help was coming. The check sat on my bed next to the letter. $15,000. I picked it up and looked at the amount written in Bethany's careful handwriting. It was more money than I'd ever had at once. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop. The toast kept replaying. Mom's voice saying I was her biggest disappointment. 200 guests watching. The wedding coordinator trying to take the microphone. Uncle Richard standing up to defend me. Julia's secret recordings. Dad's confession about Mom's diagnosis. Bethany's letter acknowledging 20 years of complicity. I read the letter again around 2 in the morning. Bethany noted that the $15,000 matched exactly what Mom spent on her wedding dress and veil. Symbolic restitution. The words felt important. Not just an apology, but an attempt to balance the scales after years of inequality. My phone rang at 7 in the morning and I grabbed it half asleep. Julia's name showed on the screen. Did you read the letter? She asked. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. Yeah, I read it. Julia was quiet for a second. We wanted to include you in the planning months ago, but the therapist said we needed to build a united front first. She said bringing in the primary abuse victim too early might make it harder for us to stay strong if Mom tried to manipulate us. Primary abuse victim. The clinical term made everything feel more real somehow. Are you okay? Julia asked. I wasn't sure how to answer that. Can we meet for breakfast? Julia said yes immediately, and we agreed on a diner far from our neighborhood where we wouldn't run into family. I got dressed and drove across town. The diner was old and quiet with cracked vinyl booths. Julia was already there when I arrived. She had her phone on the table. I want to show you something, she said after we ordered coffee. She opened the folder of video files. 47 videos labeled by date going back 3 years. We need to watch some of these together. I know it's going to be hard, but you need to see what I recorded. We started with a video from last Thanksgiving. Julia had set her phone on the table pretending to check messages, but the camera was recording. The video showed Mom talking to relatives at the far end of the table. I was visible in the frame, picking at my food and staying quiet. Mom's voice came through clearly. She spent 12 minutes explaining to aunts and uncles why I was the disappointment of the family. She listed my failures one by one. The state school instead of an Ivy League. The studio apartment instead of a house. The office job instead of a prestigious career. I sat there in the video not defending myself or arguing back, just eating and staying silent like I'd learned to do. Watching it from outside my own perspective made everything look different. The cruelty was undeniable. We watched 3 more videos before the coffee got cold. In one from Easter dinner last year, Mom spent 20 minutes explaining to my aunt why I'd never get married because I was too damaged from being raised by her. The logic didn't make sense, but nobody at the table challenged it. Another video from my birthday in July showed Mom announcing at a family barbecue that she forgot it was my birthday because I wasn't worth remembering. People laughed like it was a joke, but her face showed she meant every word. The last video we watched was from September when I got a promotion at work. I'd mentioned it casually to Julia, who told the family, and Mom's response was captured on camera. She told everyone my promotion was probably a diversity hire because I wasn't smart enough to earn it on merit. Watching myself accept these comments without fighting back felt like watching a stranger. I'd learned somewhere along the way that defending myself only made things worse. Julia closed the video folder and looked at me. She admitted she'd been working with the family therapist to understand her own role as peacemaker. The therapist explained that staying neutral and trying to smooth things over was another form of dysfunction. By keeping peace, she enabled Mom's behavior and left me without an ally when I needed one most. Julia's eyes were red when she said this. She'd spent 3 years documenting abuse but never once stepped in to stop it while it was happening. I wanted to be angry at her, but mostly I felt tired. My phone rang and Dad's name appeared on the screen. He asked if I could come to his office downtown that afternoon for a family meeting. Something in his voice sounded urgent, so I agreed, and gave Julia a ride since she'd taken the bus to meet me. Dad's office was in a building near the courthouse where he worked as an accountant. We took the elevator to the 7th floor and walked down a hallway that smelled like coffee and cleaning products. Bethany was already in the conference room when we arrived. She was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual professional clothes, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked like she'd been crying recently. Uncle Richard sat across from her with a folder of papers spread on the table. Dad introduced him as the family truth teller and witness, which made Richard smile sadly. He said someone needed to remember what actually happened over the years since Mom rewrote history constantly. A laptop sat open on the table with a video call already connected. The woman on screen introduced herself as Rita Chamberlain, the family therapist Dad mentioned. She had gray hair pulled into a bun and wore glasses that made her look like a librarian. Rita explained she was a specialist in narcissistic family systems and had been working with Dad, Bethany, and Julia since April to break the enabling patterns that allowed Mom's abuse to continue for 20 years. She spoke carefully like she was used to dealing with complicated family situations. Rita walked us through the intervention process step by step. First, we'd gather the family and show Mom video evidence of her behavior. Then each person would read a prepared statement about how her actions affected them. Finally, we'd present her with information about treatment programs and give her a clear choice about her future relationship with everyone. Rita stressed that the choice had to be Mom's decision, but the consequences would be real if she refused help. Rita explained that Mom's postpartum psychosis after Bethany's birth created a break in her perception of reality. She fixated on me as the source of her problems, even though I was just an 8-year-old kid. The condition went untreated because Mom refused to believe anything was wrong with her. Over 20 years, it evolved into full narcissistic personality disorder, with me permanently cast as the scapegoat. Rita said this pattern was common in families where one parent develops a personality disorder after a traumatic event. The parent needs someone to blame for their pain, and picks a child who reminds them of whatever triggered the break. In Mom's case, I apparently reminded her of herself before she had kids, and she hated that version of herself. None of this was my fault, but I'd spent 2 decades believing I deserved the treatment. Uncle Richard cleared his throat and started talking without looking at any of us directly. He admitted he'd been confronting Dad privately for 15 years about the abuse. He'd seen Mom push me in the pool and lie about it. He'd watched her throw away my college acceptance letters. He'd heard her tell relatives I was worthless and stupid while I sat right there at the table. Every time he brought it up to Dad, my father made excuses about not wanting to make things worse or hoping Mom would improve on her own. Richard's voice cracked when he apologized directly to me for not doing more to protect me as a child. He said he should have called child services or taken me to live with him, but he was afraid of causing a family war. His regret filled the conference room like smoke. Rita took control of the conversation again and outlined the intervention plan scheduled for next Saturday. We'd gather at Aunt Helen's house with extended family present. Helen had volunteered her home because she was done protecting Mom's feelings after the kidnapping accusation years ago. Rita would facilitate the meeting and keep things on track when Mom tried to derail the conversation. We'd show selected video clips that clearly demonstrated the pattern of abuse. Each family member would read their prepared statement without interruption. Then we'd present Mom with brochures for 3 intensive treatment programs that specialized in personality disorders. The programs ranged from 8 weeks to 6 months and included individual therapy, group sessions, and family counseling. Dad's insurance would cover most of the cost, so money wasn't an excuse. Mom would have to choose between committing to treatment or losing contact with her daughters and facing separation from Dad. The choice was hers, but the family was united in refusing to continue the current situation. Rita stressed that we needed to be prepared for Mom to react with rage, denial, or attempts to play the victim. She might try to turn family members against each other or claim we were ganging up on her. We had to stay strong and stick to the plan no matter how Mom responded. Bethany looked at me from across the table and asked if I was willing to participate in the intervention. She acknowledged that I'd already been hurt enough and had every right to refuse. Nobody would blame me if I wanted to stay away from the whole situation. I sat there thinking about 20 years of accepting abuse as normal. I thought about the wedding toast and 200 people watching Mom destroy me in public. I told Bethany I needed time to think about it. Rita said through the laptop screen that my response was completely reasonable given everything I'd been through. She offered to meet with me privately before the intervention to talk through my concerns and help me decide what felt right. The meeting ended after another 30 minutes of logistics planning. Richard gave me his phone number and told me to call any time if I needed to talk. Bethany hugged me before leaving and whispered that she understood if I never forgave her. Julia rode home with me and we drove in silence for most of the trip. I spent the next 2 days watching all 47 videos Julia had recorded. Each one lasted between 5 and 20 minutes. The cumulative effect was devastating in ways I hadn't expected. I watched myself shrink and silence over 3 years of documented abuse. In early videos from 3 years ago, I still tried to defend myself occasionally or correct Mom's lies. By the most recent videos, I just sat quietly and took whatever she said without reaction. I'd learned to make myself small and invisible, hoping she'd move on to another target. The videos showed me accepting cruelty as completely normal behavior. I never defended myself because I'd been trained since age 8 that my perspective didn't matter. Mom's version of reality was the only one that counted, and arguing just made everything worse. Watching from outside my own experience made the dysfunction impossible to ignore. I saw family members look uncomfortable during Mom's rants, but nobody ever intervened. They'd glance at each other or study their plates, but the abuse continued while everyone stayed silent. I was surrounded by witnesses who did nothing to help. The videos also showed how Mom's attacks followed a pattern. She'd start with a small criticism, then build to a full character assassination over 10 or 15 minutes. She'd compare me to my sisters, list my failures, question my intelligence, mock my appearance, and predict my future loneliness. The script varied slightly, but the structure stayed the same every time. On Wednesday, I called Rita's number and she answered after 2 rings. We talked for 90 minutes about my role in the intervention. Rita explained that my presence wasn't required, but could be powerful for the family to see me finally speaking up. She wanted me to make the decision based on what I needed for my own healing, not what the family needed from me. I'd spent my whole life putting everyone else's comfort ahead of my own well-being. This was my chance to choose what felt right for me without guilt or obligation. Rita asked what I was afraid would happen if I participated. I admitted I was scared Mom would find a way to make it my fault like she always did. I was scared the family would side with her despite the video evidence. I was scared nothing would change and I'd have exposed myself for nothing. Rita listened without interrupting, then asked what I was afraid would happen if I didn't participate. I realized I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference. I'd regret not taking the chance to finally be heard and validated by my whole family. Rita said both fears were completely valid and normal given my history. She reminded me that the intervention was happening regardless of my choice. The family was moving forward with or without me. The question was whether I wanted to be part of my own story or watch from the sidelines again. I decided to participate in the intervention because I realized this was my chance to finally be heard. For 20 years, my perspective had been dismissed and erased. Mom told her version of events and everyone accepted it as truth even when they knew she was lying. This intervention would force the family to listen to my experience without interruption or dismissal. Rita and I spent another hour on the phone role-playing different scenarios. She taught me how to stay calm when Mom tried to provoke me. She showed me how to redirect when Mom attempted to make herself the victim. She prepared me for the likely possibility that Mom would rage and deny everything despite video evidence. We practiced responses to Mom's common manipulation tactics like claiming I was too sensitive, accusing me of lying, or insisting she was only trying to help me improve. Rita reminded me that I didn't need to defend myself or prove anything. The videos spoke for themselves and the family had already decided to take action. My job was just to show up and speak my truth regardless of how Mom responded. By the end of our call, I felt more prepared but still nervous about Saturday. Rita said nervousness was normal and actually helpful, because it meant I was taking the situation seriously. Thursday evening, Julia showed up at my apartment with a notebook and her laptop. We sat on my couch and stared at blank pages for 20 minutes before either of us could write anything. Rita told us to focus on specific facts and how they made us feel, but every memory felt too big to fit into words. I wrote about the pool incident first because that one was clear in my mind. Mom pushed me into the deep end fully clothed during a family barbecue when I was 12. I couldn't swim well and panicked, swallowing water and flailing while everyone watched from the deck. Uncle Richard jumped in and pulled me out. I threw up pool water on the concrete while Mom told everyone I'd been showing off and slipped. Bethany backed up her story even though she'd been standing right there and saw the whole thing. I wrote that down in simple sentences. Mom pushed me. I almost drowned. She lied about it. Bethany lied too. I felt scared and confused because I didn't understand why my own mother would hurt me on purpose. Julia showed me what she'd written about being the peacemaker. She described Christmas 3 years ago when Mom spent the entire dinner criticizing my job, my apartment, and my clothes. Julia tried to change the subject 5 times, and finally just sat there in silence because defending me would have made Mom angrier. She wrote that her silence felt like betrayal, and she'd hated herself for it ever since. We worked for 3 hours filling pages with incidents we'd both witnessed or experienced. The donated college letters, the birthday parties, the family reunion lie about grandma. Each memory felt heavier than the last. Friday morning, Dad called and asked me to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. He brought a folder thick with papers and set it on the table between us. Medical records from Mom's brief therapy attempts in 2009 and 2011. He'd requested them from her psychiatrist doctor. Warren, using a medical power of attorney Mom had signed years ago for insurance purposes. The diagnosis was right there in black and white. Narcissistic personality disorder with paranoid features. Doctor. Warren wrote detailed notes about Mom's distorted perception of me, her inability to accept responsibility for her behavior, and her pattern of blaming others for her emotional state. He recommended intensive therapy twice a week plus medication. Mom attended 4 sessions, then stopped showing up. She told Dr. Warren he was incompetent and biased against mothers who had high standards for their children. Dad's hands shook as he showed me the pages. He'd known about this diagnosis for 14 years and done nothing. I asked him why he waited so long. He said he was scared of her rage and scared of losing his daughters if he divorced her. He thought he could manage the situation by protecting us when he could and minimizing damage where he couldn't. But he realized after the wedding toast that managing wasn't enough. The abuse had escalated to public humiliation, and he couldn't pretend anymore that things would get better on their own. That afternoon, Bethany called and asked if she could come over. She arrived with coffee and sat on my couch looking nervous. She told me about the wedding planning and how Mom tried to control every decision. The venue wasn't fancy enough. The flowers were the wrong color. The guest list included too many of Mateo's relatives and not enough of ours. Mateo's parents noticed Mom's behavior during planning meetings and started excluding her from key decisions. They took over coordinating with vendors and told Mom she could attend the wedding as a guest, but not as a planner. That's when Mom's criticism got mean. She told Bethany that Mateo's family was low class and the wedding would be embarrassing. She said Bethany was making a mistake marrying into a family with no social standing. Bethany finally told her to stop or she wouldn't be invited at all. Mom went quiet for 2 weeks, then showed up at the reception with that toast already planned. She chose to attack me instead of Bethany because I was the safe target. Bethany knew this and felt horrible about it. She said Mom's revenge for being excluded should have landed on her, not on me. But Mom's psychology didn't work that way. The golden child stays golden. The scapegoat absorbs the rage. Later that evening, Uncle Richard called with information about Aunt Helen. She'd been ready to host this intervention for at least 5 years. She never forgave Mom for calling the police that summer when she tried to take me for a break from the family. Helen had planned a month of normal activities. Swimming lessons, library visits, day trips to the beach. Just regular aunt and niece time away from Mom's constant criticism. Mom called the police on day 3 and reported a kidnapping. Officers showed up at Helen's house and questioned both of us. I was 13 and terrified. I told them I wanted to stay with my aunt, but Mom insisted I'd been coerced. The officers made me go home. Helen tried to fight it legally, but Mom threatened a restraining order. Richard said Helen had been waiting for the family to finally take action against Mom's behavior. She offered her house for the intervention immediately when Dad asked. She wanted to be part of holding Mom accountable after years of watching from the sidelines. Friday night, I couldn't eat dinner. My stomach felt tight and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Julia came over around 8 with bags of snacks and her laptop loaded with movies. We tried to watch a comedy, but I couldn't focus on the screen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom's face at the reception, twisted with satisfaction as she humiliated me in front of 200 people. Julia paused the movie and asked what I was most scared of. I told her I was scared Mom would find a way to make this my fault like she always did. I was scared the family would believe her version of events even with video evidence. I was scared nothing would change and I'd have exposed myself for nothing. Julia reminded me that Dad and Bethany were already committed to the intervention regardless of my participation. The family was moving forward with or without me. The question was whether I wanted to be part of my own story or watch from the sidelines again. We stayed up until 3 in the morning watching movies and eating popcorn. Julia fell asleep on my couch and I lay awake staring at the ceiling thinking about tomorrow. Saturday morning felt surreal. I showered and dressed in comfortable clothes because Rita said the intervention might last several hours. Julia woke up and we drove to Aunt Helen's house together. We arrived at 10 and found the living room already set up with chairs arranged in a circle. Dad was there looking exhausted. Bethany sat near the window with Mateo beside her for support. Uncle Richard stood by the fireplace talking quietly with Helen. 2 of Mom's sisters were present along with another uncle I recognized from family gatherings. Rita arrived last, carrying a briefcase and wearing a professional but kind expression. She greeted everyone and asked us to take our seats. The atmosphere felt heavy. Nobody made small talk or joked around. This was serious and everyone knew it. Rita stood in the center of the circle and reviewed the intervention structure one more time. Dad would speak first, explaining why we were gathered. Then Julia would show selected video clips on her laptop. After that, each family member would read their prepared statement. Finally, we'd present Mom with information about 3 treatment programs and give her a clear choice. Rita emphasized that we needed to stay calm regardless of Mom's reactions. She would likely get angry, try to leave, play victim, or attempt to turn family members against each other. Our job was to remain united and hold firm boundaries. If Mom refused treatment, we would all commit to no contact. Dad would file for separation. The daughters would block her number and refuse visits. Extended family would not include her in gatherings. Rita asked if everyone understood and was ready. We all nodded. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Mom arrived at 11, pulling into the driveway in her silver sedan. Through the window, I watched her check her makeup in the mirror and grab her purse. She walked up to the door expecting a casual family brunch that Dad had invented as a cover story. Helen opened the door, and Mom stepped inside with a smile that died the second she saw the room set up. Her eyes moved from the circle of chairs to Rita standing in the center, to the serious faces of 10 family members. Her expression shifted from confusion to suspicion to rage in about 5 seconds. She looked at Dad and her voice came out sharp. "What is this?" Dad gestured to an empty chair. "We need to talk." Mom's face flushed red and she started backing toward the door. "This is a setup. I'm not staying for this." Uncle Richard moved to block the doorway. His voice was calm but firm. "You need to hear what we have to say. If you leave now, you'll lose contact with your daughters." Mom stared at him like he'd slapped her. "You can't threaten me and my own family." Richard didn't move. "We're not threatening you. We're telling you the truth about what happens next." Mom stood frozen for a long moment, then walked stiffly to the empty chair and sat down. Her arms crossed over her chest and her face twisted into an expression I'd seen 1,000 times. Defensive rage mixed with calculating anger. She was already planning her counterattack. Rita introduced herself and explained that we were gathered because we love Mom, but can no longer watch her behavior harm the family. We were going to share some difficult truths and present her with options for getting help. Mom interrupted immediately. "This is an ambush. You're all ganging up on me like you always do." Rita's voice stayed steady. "We're here because your behavior toward Melissa has caused serious harm for 20 years. We have evidence we'd like you to see." Mom's eyes found me across the circle and her expression turned cold. "Of course this is about Melissa. She's always been the problem in this family and now she's turned all of you against me." Julia pulled her laptop from her bag and set it on the coffee table in front of Mom's chair. The screen glowed blue as she opened a folder labeled with dates spanning 3 years. Rita nodded at her to begin, and Julia clicked the first file. The video opened with our Thanksgiving table from last year, the camera angle showing Mom at the head with me sitting 4 seats down. Mom's voice filled the room clear and loud as she spoke to Aunt Helen about my job. She spent 12 minutes listing every way my career fell short compared to Bethany's medical residency and Julia's graduate program. The camera captured my face as I pushed food around my plate and said nothing, while relatives shifted uncomfortably, but nobody interrupted. Mom on screen gestured at me with her wine glass and told everyone I'd probably never advance beyond my current position because I lacked ambition. The mom sitting in Helen's living room watched the screen with her arms still crossed. Her face started out defiant, but slowly the color drained from her cheeks. She couldn't claim the video was edited or taken out of context because the timestamp showed 12 uninterrupted minutes, and her own voice condemned her without any help from me. Julia let the first video finish, then opened the next file. This one showed Christmas 2 years ago, where Mom explained to extended family why she worried about my future. The pattern repeated with Mom detailing my shortcomings while I sat silent, and relatives looked uncomfortable but said nothing. We played 5 more clips total, and each one showed the same dynamic playing out across different holidays and family gatherings. Mom on screen criticized my apartment, my car, my clothes, my choices, always with me present, and always with that same tone mixing pity and contempt. The cumulative evidence built into something impossible to deny. By the 3rd video, 2 of my aunts were crying quietly. By the 5th, Uncle Richard had his head in his hands. The mom in the chair watched herself humiliate me over and over with her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. When the videos ended, Rita asked if Mom understood what we'd just shown her. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it and said nothing. Dad pulled folded papers from his jacket pocket and smoothed them on his lap. His hands shook slightly as he began reading his statement out loud. He apologized to me for 20 years of failing to protect me from Mom's abuse. His voice cracked when he explained how his fear of Mom's rage made him complicit in everything she did. He described specific times he should have intervened, but didn't because keeping peace felt easier than confronting her. He told Mom directly while looking at her that her behavior toward me was unacceptable and had to change. If she refused treatment, he was prepared to file for separation, because he couldn't watch her destroy our daughter anymore. Mom's face went pale again and she started to speak, but Dad held up his hand. He wasn't done reading. He listed the ways he'd enabled her by making excuses, by minimizing the damage, by prioritizing her feelings over my well-being. When he finished, he folded the papers and looked at me with tears on his face. The apology didn't erase 20 years, but hearing him finally acknowledge the truth out loud mattered more than I expected. Bethany stood next, and her hands trembled so badly the paper rattled. She read in a shaking voice about benefiting from being the golden child while I suffered. She acknowledged that every compliment Mom gave her came at my expense. Every achievement she celebrated meant another comparison that hurt me. She told Mom the favoritism damaged both of us in different ways. It gave Bethany an inflated sense of superiority she had to unlearn in therapy, and it taught me I was fundamentally less worthy. She said she was ashamed it took her 28 years to stand up for her sister, when she should have done it at age 10 or 12 or 15. She described specific incidents where she stayed silent, including the pool pushing where she watched Mom shove me, then lie about it to everyone. She told Mom she couldn't be the golden child anymore, because the role required someone else to be the scapegoat, and she refused to participate in that dynamic. When Bethany sat down, she was crying, and I realized I was too. Julia read her statement standing near the window with afternoon light behind her. She focused on her role as peacemaker, and how Mom's dysfunction forced her to choose between keeping peace and protecting me. For years, she chose peace because that felt like the only way to survive in our family. She described the weight of staying neutral while watching Mom abuse me, the guilt of filming secretly instead of intervening openly, the shame of being 25 years old before finding the courage to act. She told Mom she was done prioritizing Mom's feelings over basic human decency. She wouldn't attend any family events where Mom mistreated me, and she'd use her video evidence to document any future abuse. She said the peacemaker role was just another dysfunction, and she was breaking free from it even if that meant conflict. When she finished, she walked over and sat next to me on the couch and took my hand. Uncle Richard stood with his statement in one hand and reading glasses in the other. His voice came out steady and firm as he read about watching Mom's abuse escalate over 20 years while the family stayed silent. He named specific incidents, including the pool pushing when I was 12, the donated college letters that destroyed my options, the birthday parties thrown for my sisters on my birthday. He told Mom her behavior had been witnessed and documented by everyone present, and we all shared responsibility for letting it continue. He said he confronted Dad privately for 15 years, but should have made the confrontation public much sooner. He described the family system that allowed one person's cruelty to dominate everyone else's behavior through fear and avoidance. He told Mom directly that her actions were abusive regardless of her mental health diagnosis, and she needed to take full responsibility without excuses. When he sat down, he looked at me and mouthed an apology. Aunt Helen stood without papers and spoke from memory with barely controlled anger in her voice. She described the summer she tried to give me a break from Mom's abuse by inviting me to stay with her family. I was 13 and desperate to escape, and Helen saw it clearly. She told Mom that calling the police and accusing her of kidnapping was evil. It wasn't protective parenting, it was controlling behavior designed to maintain power over me. She said she never forgave Mom for prioritizing control over my well-being, and she'd been waiting years for the family to finally hold Mom accountable. She described watching me shrink over the years from a bright 8-year-old into a silent 28-year-old who believed she deserved mistreatment. She told Mom that the wedding toast was just the public version of what Mom had been doing privately for 2 decades, and everyone in this room knew it. When Helen finished, she sat down hard in her chair and wiped her eyes. I stood last with my statement printed on 3 pages that felt like they weighed 10 pounds. My hands shook so badly that Julia had to stand and hold the paper steady while I read. I described what it felt like growing up believing I was fundamentally broken and unlovable. Every comparison to my sisters taught me I was less smart, less pretty, less worthy of love and attention. Every criticism built on the last until I couldn't see myself clearly anymore, only through Mom's eyes as the disappointment and failure. I told her about the therapy I started 3 years ago to undo the damage, the slow work of learning that her perception of me wasn't truth. I described how the wedding toast felt like the ultimate public confirmation of what I'd always feared everyone secretly believed about me. But it was just the public version of what she'd been saying privately my whole life. I told her I didn't know if I could forgive her, but I knew I couldn't keep accepting her treatment. When I finished reading, my voice was barely a whisper, and my face was wet with tears. Mom's face went through changes as she listened to 8 family members detail her behavior. She tried to interrupt Dad with justifications, but Rita firmly told her to wait until everyone finished. She tried again during Bethany's statement, and Rita redirected her the same way. By the time I finished reading, Mom's expression showed rage mixed with denial, mixed with something that might have been shame. Her mouth opened and closed several times like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find words. Rita asked if she understood what we'd shared, and Mom nodded slowly. Rita asked if she recognized her behavior in the videos, and Mom's face twisted, but she nodded again. Rita asked if she understood the harm she'd caused, and Mom looked at me for the first time since the videos played and whispered yes. Rita pulled folders from her bag and spread them on the coffee table in front of Mom. She explained these were 3 intensive treatment programs specializing in personality disorders. The first program ran 8 weeks with daily individual therapy and group sessions. The second program lasted 3 months with a residential component for the first month. The third program was 6 months long with twice-weekly sessions and family therapy starting in month 2. All 3 programs included work on narcissistic patterns, family systems, and trauma processing. Rita explained that Dad's insurance would cover most of the cost for any program Mom chose. The folder included intake information, program schedules, and contact details for each facility. Rita told Mom she had a choice to make, but she needed to understand what was at stake. If she chose treatment and committed to real change, the family would support her recovery. If she refused treatment or quit partway through, every person in this room would cut contact, and Dad would file for separation. Rita laid out the choice with a calm voice that somehow made the weight of it feel heavier. Mom could commit to intensive treatment and do the hard work of changing her behavior patterns, or she could lose contact with her daughters and face separation from Dad. The choice was hers, but the family was united in refusing to continue the current dynamic. She explained that the programs required full commitment, not just showing up, but actually engaging with the painful process of examining why she hurt the people she claimed to love. Mom sat frozen in her chair while Rita spoke, her hands gripping the armrests so hard her knuckles turned white. The treatment folders sat on the coffee table in front of her like evidence at a trial, each one representing a different path forward, that required her to admit she'd been wrong for 20 years. Rita finished by saying that everyone in this room was prepared to follow through on the consequences if Mom refused help or quit halfway through. Dad nodded when she said it, and so did Bethany and Julia, and even the aunts and uncles who'd stayed silent for so long were nodding too. Mom's face changed from pale shock to red fury in seconds. She exploded out of her chair screaming that we were all against her, and this was proof that I'd turned everyone into believing lies about her. Her voice cracked as she pointed at me and said I'd been poisoning the family for years, playing the victim and making her look like a monster when all she'd ever done was try to push me to be better. She said the videos were taken out of context, that I probably told Julia what to record and when to record it, that this whole intervention was just another way for me to make myself the center of attention. Uncle Richard stood up then with his arms crossed, and his voice stayed completely calm when he spoke. He told Mom that we had video evidence of her own words coming out of her own mouth, and her behavior condemned her without any input from me whatsoever. He said she could rage all she wanted, but the recordings didn't lie, and 47 separate incidents over 3 years showed a clear pattern that had nothing to do with me manipulating anyone. Mom switched tactics immediately when she realized the rage wasn't working. She started crying and saying she'd always tried her best, and we were ungrateful for everything she'd sacrificed for this family. She talked about giving up her career to raise us, about all the sleepless nights and doctor appointments and school events she attended, about how hard it was being a mother when nobody appreciated what she did. She said she wasn't perfect, but she'd loved us and provided for us, and we were throwing her away like garbage over a few moments when she'd been stressed or said things she didn't mean. Aunt Helen cut her off before she could continue. She stood up and started listing specific incidents of cruelty that had nothing to do with sacrifice and everything to do with deliberate harm. She brought up the pool incident when Mom pushed me in and lied about it. She mentioned the college acceptance letters Mom donated before I could respond to them. She talked about the birthday parties Mom threw for my sisters on my actual birthday. She described the summer when she'd tried to give me a break, and Mom called the police claiming kidnapping. Each example was specific and detailed and impossible to dismiss as stress or imperfect parenting. Rita raised her hand and suggested Mom take a break to process what she'd heard. She said we'd step outside for 20 minutes while Mom sat alone in the living room with the treatment program information, and Mom could use that time to think about what she wanted to do next. We all filed out through the back door into Aunt Helen's yard while Mom stayed inside. Through the window, I could see her sitting on the couch with the folders spread around her, and her hands were shaking as she picked up each program description and read through the details. Dad stood next to me on the patio and lit another cigarette even though he'd already smoked 2 today. Bethany and Julia huddled together talking quietly, and the aunts and uncles formed their own group near the fence. Nobody knew what Mom would decide, and the waiting felt worse than the confrontation had been. I watched her through the window reading about intensive therapy and group sessions and family counseling, and I wondered if any part of her actually understood what she'd done to me, or if she was just calculating which choice would cost her less. When we went back inside after 20 minutes, Mom looked different somehow. Her shoulders were slumped forward and her face had lost that hard defensive expression she'd worn during the videos. She looked smaller sitting there, surrounded by the treatment folders, like she'd deflated into something more fragile than the raging woman who'd screamed at us earlier. She asked in a quiet voice if I really believed she'd been abusive. Her eyes met mine for the first time since the videos had played, and there was something in her expression that wasn't rage or manipulation. I told her yes. The evidence was undeniable, and I'd been damaged by her treatment since I was 8 years old. I said the wedding toast was just the public version of what she'd been saying privately for 20 years, and every comparison to my sisters had taught me I was less smart, less pretty, less worthy of love and attention. I told her about the therapy I'd started 3 years ago to undo the damage, about the slow work of learning that her perception of me wasn't truth. She flinched when I said that last part like I'd slapped her. Mom started crying then, but the tears looked different from her usual manipulative displays. Her face crumpled and she covered it with her hands while her shoulders shook. She whispered that she didn't remember it being this bad, that in her mind she'd just been trying to motivate me to do better, like her own mother had done with her. Rita moved closer and gently explained that narcissistic personality disorder often involves distorted perception and memory, which was why treatment was essential. She said Mom's brain had created a version of events that protected her from seeing herself as cruel, and that protective mechanism was part of the disorder. Rita told her that recovery would mean facing the real memories instead of the edited versions, and that process would be painful but necessary if she wanted to heal. Mom kept crying and asked if she was really that sick, if she'd really hurt me that badly without knowing it. Rita said yes. The damage was real and documented, and acknowledging that reality was the first step toward change. Dad knelt down next to Mom's chair and took her hand. He told her he loved her, but he couldn't watch her destroy their daughter anymore. His voice was steady, but I could see tears in his eyes when he said he'd spent 20 years being too afraid to act, and he was done being a coward who enabled her abuse. He said he was prepared to support her through treatment if she chose to go, but if she refused, he'd file for legal separation, and the girls would have no contact with her. He told her she'd miss future grandchildren and family milestones, that she'd spend holidays alone while the rest of us built a healthier family without her. He said he knew that sounded harsh, but the stakes were too high to pretend anymore, and she needed to understand what she stood to lose if she didn't change. Mom squeezed his hand and asked what would happen to them, to their marriage. Dad said that depended entirely on whether she committed to real change or just went through the motions to avoid consequences. The weight of potential consequences seemed to break through Mom's defenses in a way the videos and statements hadn't. She picked up the treatment folders again and started asking questions about the programs. She wanted to know how long they took, whether she'd have to go away somewhere, or if she could stay home, what the daily schedule looked like, whether she'd have to talk about private things in front of strangers. She asked what would happen if she tried but couldn't change, if the disorder was too strong or too deep to fix. Her vulnerability in this moment felt genuine in a way I'd never seen from her before. She wasn't performing or manipulating, she was actually scared about what came next. Rita answered each question patiently, explaining that the 8-week program had daily sessions, but she could live at home, while the longer programs included residential components. She said group therapy would be part of any program, because hearing from others with similar patterns helped break through denial. Rita explained that change was possible, but it required Mom to acknowledge the harm she'd caused, take responsibility without justifications, and commit to intensive therapeutic work. She said the process would be difficult and uncomfortable, because Mom would have to examine beliefs and behaviors she'd held for decades. She'd have to sit with the reality of how much damage she'd done to me, and she couldn't minimize it or explain it away. Rita told her that some people with narcissistic personality disorder did make real progress in treatment, but it required them to push through shame and resistance instead of falling back on old defensive patterns. The alternative was losing her family permanently, and that wasn't a threat. It was just the natural consequence of refusing to address behavior that harmed the people around her. Rita said the choice was Mom's to make, but she needed to make it today, and everyone in this room would hold her accountable to whatever she decided. Mom looked directly at me for the first time since the videos played and said she was sorry. The words came out barely above a whisper, and her face was wet with tears. It wasn't the full apology I needed, not even close, but hearing her say those words after 20 years of never admitting fault felt significant. Rita told me later when we had a moment alone that any acknowledgement at this stage was significant progress, and real amends would take months of therapeutic work. She said Mom's apology was probably genuine in the moment, but the disorder would try to pull her back into denial and justification once the immediate pressure was off. That's why the treatment commitment had to be ironclad with clear consequences, because without external accountability, Mom would likely slip back into old patterns within weeks. I nodded and watched Mom sitting there looking smaller and more broken than I'd ever seen her, and I didn't know if I felt relief or sadness or just exhaustion from finally being heard. Mom picked up the treatment program brochure with shaking hands and read through the schedule details for several minutes while the rest of us waited in silence. Rita explained that the 8-week intensive program started in 2 weeks on a Monday and required daily attendance from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, but Mom could live at home and drive herself there each day. The facility was only 20 minutes from our house and offered morning and afternoon sessions depending on participant schedules. Mom asked what the daily sessions would involve, and Rita walked her through a typical day that included individual therapy, group therapy with other people working on personality disorders, skills training for emotional regulation, and homework assignments to practice new behaviors. Family therapy sessions would start in week 4, once her therapist decided she was ready to engage with us productively, instead of defensively. Mom looked at me and asked if I would participate in those family sessions, and I said yes, but only if her therapist confirmed she was making real progress and taking responsibility. Rita added that the program had strict participation requirements, and if Mom missed more than 2 sessions without medical excuse or showed up, but refused to engage honestly, she would be dropped from the program. Mom nodded slowly and said she would do it. She would enter the program and try to change, even though the idea of facing what she'd done scared her more than anything. Dad reached over and squeezed her hand, which surprised me because I expected him to stay distant after everything that happened today. Rita pulled out a folder with paperwork and explained the clear expectations and consequences that everyone needed to understand before we left this room. If Mom dropped out of treatment voluntarily or got kicked out for non-participation, the family would implement the no-contact boundary immediately, with no second chances or negotiations. Dad would file for legal separation within 1 week and move forward with divorce proceedings. Bethany, Julia, and I would block Mom's phone number, email, and social media, and we would not attend any family events where she was present. If Mom completed the 8 weeks but then minimized her behavior in family therapy sessions or blamed me for her actions, the same consequences would apply because that would prove she hadn't actually changed. Rita emphasized that this wasn't meant to be cruel, but rather to protect me from further abuse and to give Mom clear motivation to take treatment seriously instead of going through the motions. Mom's face went pale as Rita listed each consequence, and she asked what would happen to her relationship with future grandchildren if Bethany or Julia had kids. Rita said bluntly that if Mom refused treatment or failed to change, she would have no relationship with any grandchildren, because her daughters would not expose their children to the same abuse I experienced. That reality seemed to hit Mom harder than anything else we'd said today, and she started crying again, but this time without the manipulative edge I'd seen so many times before. Dad told Mom he loved her and wanted their marriage to survive, but he couldn't watch her destroy our daughter anymore, and he should have drawn this line 20 years ago when the abuse started. Mom whispered that she understood, and she would do whatever it took to keep her family even if the process was painful and humiliating. Rita said we needed to schedule a follow-up family meeting for next week to discuss logistics and boundaries during Mom's treatment, because there were practical details to work out before the program started. She emphasized multiple times that my healing was the priority in all of this, and I got to decide what level of contact I was comfortable with during Mom's 8-week program. If I wanted no contact until family therapy started in week 4, that was completely valid and the family would support that boundary. If I wanted brief phone calls on a schedule or supervised visits, that was also fine as long as I felt safe and respected. Rita made it clear that Mom didn't get to push for more contact than I offered, and any attempts to guilt me or manipulate me into seeing her would result in immediate consequences. Mom nodded and said she would respect whatever boundaries I set, even if it meant not seeing me for a month. We agreed to meet at Rita's office next Saturday morning at 10 to go over the details and make sure everyone understood the plan going forward. Rita reminded us that this was a marathon, not a sprint, and real change would take months or years of continued work beyond the initial 8-week program. She said many people with personality disorders made genuine progress in intensive treatment, but maintaining that progress required ongoing therapy and constant self-awareness about old patterns trying to resurface. Mom asked if she could hug me before she left, and I hesitated for a long moment before saying okay, but keeping the hug brief and stiff. She whispered that she was sorry again, and I didn't respond because words weren't enough after 20 years of damage. Dad and Mom left together, and the rest of us sat in Aunt Helen's living room processing what just happened. The intervention had lasted nearly 4 hours, and I felt completely drained, like every bit of energy had been wrung out of my body. Uncle Richard spoke first and apologized directly to me for not doing more over the years to stop Mom's abuse. He said he confronted Dad privately many times and tried to make family members see what was happening, but he should have been louder and more persistent instead of backing down when Mom threatened to cut people off. Aunt Helen apologized next with tears running down her face as she described the summer she tried to take me away and how helpless she felt when Mom called the police and accused her of kidnapping. She said she should have fought harder and gotten lawyers involved instead of giving up when Mom threatened legal action. My other aunts and uncle each took turns apologizing for witnessing the abuse at family gatherings and staying silent because they didn't want to cause drama or get cut off from the family. One aunt admitted she stopped hosting holidays at her house because she couldn't stand watching Mom tear me down at her dinner table, but she never told anyone that was the real reason. Their apologies didn't erase the damage or make up for decades of inaction, but hearing them acknowledge what happened helped validate my experience in a way I'd never felt before. For 20 years, I'd wondered if I was crazy or too sensitive or actually the problem like Mom claimed, but now I had a room full of witnesses confirming that yes, the abuse was real, and yes, it was as bad as I remembered. Bethany and Julia pulled me aside after the extended family members started leaving and asked if I wanted to stay with one of them for a while, instead of going back to my studio apartment alone. Bethany said she and Mateo had a guest room that was currently empty, and I was welcome to use it for as long as I needed while they settled into married life. Julia offered her spare bedroom and said she worked from home most days, so I wouldn't be alone if I needed company or support. The offer surprised me because my apartment had always been my refuge from family drama, but suddenly the idea of being alone there felt isolating and sad. I accepted Bethany's offer because her house was closer to Rita's office where I'd be meeting for family sessions, and she had more space than Julia's smaller place. Bethany hugged me and said we'd pick up my essentials from my apartment tomorrow, and I could stay as long as I wanted without any pressure or timeline. Having family support felt completely unfamiliar after spending most of my adult life keeping everyone at arm's length to protect myself from Mom's abuse, but I realized I needed to learn how to accept help from people who genuinely cared about me. Mateo appeared and told me their home was my home, and he was glad to have me stay with them while I processed everything that happened. He'd only been part of the family for a few months, but he'd already seen enough of Mom's behavior to understand why this intervention was necessary. Over the next 2 weeks before Mom started treatment, I began individual therapy with a trauma specialist Rita recommended. Dr. Elaine Ayala had been practicing for 15 years and specialized in helping adults recover from childhood scapegoating and narcissistic family abuse. Our first session lasted 90 minutes, and I spent most of it crying as I described growing up believing I was fundamentally defective and unlovable because my own mother couldn't stand me. Dr. Ayala explained that scapegoating was a form of psychological abuse where one family member got blamed for everything wrong in the family system, and that role wasn't based on anything real about me or my behavior. She said children who grow up as scapegoats often internalize the belief that they're the problem and spend their adult lives trying to prove their worth to people who will never acknowledge it. The role I played in my family wasn't my fault and wasn't caused by any deficiency in me, but rather by Mom's mental illness and the family's dysfunction in enabling her behavior. Dr. Ayala helped me understand that I'd spent 20 years trying to fix something that was never broken in me, but rather broken in the family system that cast me as the bad one. She gave me homework assignments to identify negative beliefs I held about myself and trace them back to specific things Mom said or did over the years. Writing down those connections helped me see how much of my self-perception was based on Mom's distorted view rather than reality. Julia spent hours compiling the video evidence into an organized timeline document for Mom's treatment team. She created a spreadsheet with 47 entries listing the date, location, duration, and brief description of each recorded incident. The document showed clear patterns of escalation over 3 years, with Mom's attacks becoming more frequent and more cruel as time went on. Rita explained that seeing the behavior pattern laid out objectively would be crucial for Mom's therapy work, assuming she was willing to face it honestly instead of making excuses. The treatment facility requested copies of the videos and timeline so Mom's therapist could review them before their first session and understand the full scope of abuse. Julia also created a backup copy and stored it in 3 separate locations, including a cloud service and external hard drive, because she worried Mom might try to destroy the evidence if she got access to it. Rita praised Julia's documentation work and said having concrete evidence instead of just family testimony would make it much harder for Mom to deny or minimize what she'd done. The videos would serve as undeniable proof whenever Mom's disorder tried to rewrite history or shift blame. Dad moved into the guest bedroom at home and told Mom their marriage was on pause pending her treatment progress. He packed up his clothes and personal items from their shared bedroom and set up the guest room as his temporary space with clear boundaries about privacy and separate lives. Mom reportedly cried and begged him to reconsider, but he held firm and said he needed physical and emotional distance while she worked on herself. Dad started his own therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in codependency and enabling behavior. His therapist helped him understand how his fear of Mom's rage and his desire to keep peace had allowed the abuse to continue for 2 decades when he should have protected me. Dad called me twice during those 2 weeks to apologize again and ask how I was doing at Bethany's house. He sounded tired and sad, but also more determined than I'd ever heard him. He said he was learning to set boundaries he should have established 20 years ago, and he was committed to being a better father even if it meant his marriage ended. Mom started the intensive program on the scheduled Monday, and the first week was reportedly very difficult. Her therapist, Dr. Simmons, called Rita on Friday to coordinate care, and he confirmed Mom was resistant and defensive during sessions, but she was showing up daily, which was more than she'd done in previous treatment attempts. Dr. Simmons said Mom spent the first 3 days insisting the family was overreacting and taking things out of context, but by Thursday she'd started to crack when other group members confronted her behavior. The group therapy component seemed to be particularly challenging for Mom because she couldn't charm or manipulate her way out of accountability when peers who struggled with similar issues called out her defensive patterns. Dr. Simmons told Rita he was cautiously optimistic that Mom might actually engage with treatment this time because the consequences were real enough to motivate her, and she seemed genuinely scared of losing her family. He warned that the first few weeks would be rocky as Mom's defenses broke down, and she had to face uncomfortable truths about herself. In week 2 of Mom's program, she had what her therapist described as a breakthrough during a group session. Another patient in the group confronted Mom about minimizing her behavior, and something about hearing it from a peer rather than family finally cracked her defensive wall. Dr. Simmons called Rita to report that Mom had broken down crying in group, and admitted for the first time that maybe she had been cruel to me, and maybe her perception of me wasn't based on reality. The other group members shared their own stories of scapegoating family members, and Mom saw herself reflected in their behavior in a way she couldn't deny or dismiss. Dr. Simmons said it was a significant moment, but cautioned that one breakthrough didn't mean Mom was cured, or that her progress was guaranteed. People with personality disorders often had moments of clarity followed by regression back into old patterns when the discomfort became too intense. The real test would be whether Mom could sit with the shame and guilt of facing what she'd done, instead of falling back on blame and justification to protect herself from those painful feelings. Rita scheduled our family session for the following Thursday afternoon at her office downtown. Dad drove Bethany, Julia, and me in his car because none of us felt like making small talk in separate vehicles. The office was on the 3rd floor of a professional building with beige walls and generic landscape paintings that probably came from a bulk furniture store. We sat in a circle on cushioned chairs while Rita pulled out her notes and asked us to share how we were feeling about the intervention and Mom's treatment progress. Dad went first and talked about the relief of finally taking action after decades of watching Mom hurt me without stopping her. His voice cracked when he described the guilt he carried for being too afraid of her rage to protect his own daughter. Bethany spoke next and admitted she was grieving the years we lost as sisters, because Mom's favoritism created a barrier between us that I didn't build, and she didn't question. Julia said she felt anxious about whether Mom's change would last beyond the 8 weeks of intensive treatment, or if she'd regress back into old patterns once the structure and accountability disappeared. I told them I was scared to hope that things could actually be different, because hoping and being disappointed again felt more painful than just accepting Mom would never change. Rita validated all our feelings and explained that family recovery from narcissistic abuse was a long process that didn't end when the abuser finished a treatment program. We spent 90 minutes talking through our fears and expectations, and what we each needed from this process to feel safe moving forward. Rita emphasized that my healing was the priority, and my sisters and dad needed to support my boundaries, even if it meant less contact with Mom than they wanted for themselves. Dr. Simmons called Rita the next week to report that Mom had completed 4 weeks of intensive treatment and was showing genuine progress in acknowledging the harm she caused. Rita shared the update with me during my individual session and explained that Mom was beginning to take responsibility for specific incidents without immediately justifying or minimizing her behavior. The breakthrough in group therapy had opened something in Mom where she could see her actions reflected in other patients' stories and recognize patterns she'd been blind to for 20 years. Dr. Simmons said Mom was working on understanding how her postpartum psychosis after Bethany's birth had evolved into entrenched personality patterns that shaped how she viewed me. The other group members had confronted Mom about her tendency to blame me for her own feelings, and that peer feedback seemed to land differently than family confrontation. Dr. Simmons cautioned that 4 weeks of progress didn't mean Mom was cured or that her gains were permanent, but he was cautiously optimistic that she was engaging with treatment more honestly than she had in previous attempts. Rita asked if I felt ready to participate in a family therapy session with Mom present in week 5, and I said yes, even though the thought made my stomach hurt. The family therapy session happened on a Tuesday afternoon in a different office at the treatment center where Mom was doing her program. Mom sat across from me looking smaller than I remembered, her face pale without makeup and her hands folded in her lap. Dr. Simmons sat beside her while Rita sat beside me with Dad, Bethany, and Julia filling the other chairs in the circle. Mom pulled out a piece of paper that was clearly prepared with Dr. Simmons's help and started reading an apology that took responsibility for specific incidents, including the wedding toast, the pool incident when I was 12, and years of comparison and criticism that damaged my sense of worth. Her voice shook while she read, and she looked up at me several times like she was checking if I believed her. She said she was sorry for making me the target of her illness, and for creating family roles that hurt all 3 of her daughters in different ways. She acknowledged that her postpartum psychosis had triggered something in her brain that made her fixate on me as the problem, and instead of getting help, she'd spent 20 years reinforcing that false narrative. Dr. Simmons had clearly helped her write this because Mom on her own would never use words like fixate or false narrative or acknowledge that her perception was distorted. The apology wasn't perfect, and I could tell Mom still didn't fully grasp the depth of damage she caused. She talked about incidents like they were isolated mistakes, instead of a systematic pattern of abuse that shaped my entire childhood and young adulthood. Dr. Simmons must have noticed my reaction because he jumped in to explain that this was normal early progress in treatment for personality disorders. Real understanding and changed behavior would take months or years of continued work, not just 8 weeks of intensive treatment that gave her basic tools and awareness. He said Mom was at the stage where she could intellectually acknowledge harm, but hadn't yet developed the emotional capacity to truly sit with the pain she inflicted. That capacity would grow through ongoing therapy if Mom stayed committed to the work, but it required her to keep showing up even when facing her behavior became uncomfortable. Rita asked how I felt hearing Mom's apology, and I said it was a start, but words weren't enough after 20 years of cruelty. I needed to see sustained behavior change over time before I could trust that Mom's progress was real and lasting. Mom asked what she could do to begin making amends, and her question sounded genuine instead of defensive. I told her the truth because Rita had prepared me to be direct about my needs. Show up consistently to therapy twice a week without excuses or cancellations. Stop comparing me to my sisters in any context, whether positive or negative, because comparison was the foundation of how she'd abused me. Acknowledge my accomplishments without qualifiers like, that's good for you, or, at least you tried, that implied I was still less than. Respect boundaries I was going to establish about our contact, because I needed space to heal without her presence triggering me constantly. Mom nodded while I talked and wrote down notes on the back of her apology paper. She asked if I would be willing to have monthly phone calls, and I said maybe eventually, but not yet, because I wasn't ready for regular contact. Dr. Simmons suggested we table the specific contact schedule until Mom completed the full 8 weeks and transitioned to ongoing therapy, and we could revisit boundaries after she demonstrated consistent progress. I spent the next week working with Dr. Ayala to create a written boundary document that outlined what kind of contact I was comfortable with moving forward. The document specified that I would attend monthly family dinners with other family present as a buffer, accept brief phone calls on a schedule we agreed to in advance. But I was not available for spontaneous visits or private one-on-one time until I saw sustained behavior change over at least 6 months. I would not discuss my personal life beyond surface-level information, because Mom had used my vulnerabilities against me too many times. I would not accept gifts or money from her because those had always come with strings attached. I would leave immediately if she compared me to my sisters, criticized my choices, or made passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. Dr. Ayala helped me phrase everything in clear, direct language that left no room for Mom to claim she misunderstood or didn't realize she'd crossed a line. We made copies of the document for Mom, Dad, my sisters, and Rita, so everyone knew exactly what my boundaries were and could support me in enforcing them. Mom completed the 8-week intensive program at the end of October and transitioned to twice-weekly ongoing therapy with Dr. Simmons. Her discharge summary noted significant progress in acknowledging harmful behavior patterns, but emphasized the need for continued treatment to maintain gains and prevent regression. Dr. Simmons warned that the transition from intensive daily therapy to twice-weekly sessions was a vulnerable time when patients often slipped back into old patterns without the constant structure and accountability. He recommended monthly family therapy sessions to monitor mom's progress and address issues before they escalated. Rita agreed to facilitate those sessions and scheduled the first one for mid-November. Dad reported that mom seemed genuinely committed to ongoing therapy and was reading books Dr. Simmons recommended about narcissistic personality disorder and family systems. She'd started journaling about her feelings instead of immediately acting on them, which was a new skill she learned in the intensive program. Dad was cautiously optimistic, but maintaining boundaries about their marriage, still sleeping in the guest room and limiting their interactions to practical household matters. 3 months after the intervention, we gathered at Aunt Helen's house for Thanksgiving, with the whole extended family present. I was nervous about seeing Mom in a social setting after months of limited contact, but Bethany and Julia stayed close to me as a support system. Mom's behavior was noticeably different from every previous family gathering I could remember. She asked me questions about my life without immediately comparing my answers to my sister's accomplishments. She complimented my outfit, a blue sweater and black pants, without adding qualifiers about how it would look better if I lost weight or styled my hair differently. When she started to slip into old patterns by mentioning that Bethany had just gotten a promotion, she caught herself mid-sentence and apologized for making a comparison. The apology was awkward and everyone at the table noticed, but the fact that she recognized her mistake and corrected it felt significant. Uncle Richard watched Mom carefully throughout dinner like he was waiting for her to explode, but she stayed calm even when the conversation didn't center on her. Aunt Helen told me privately in the kitchen that she'd never seen Mom work this hard to control her behavior, and while 3 months wasn't enough time to trust the change completely, it was more progress than she'd expected. I used some of Bethany's $15,000 to enroll in a professional development course on project management that I'd been interested in for years. My job involved coordinating multiple tasks and deadlines, but I'd never had formal training in the methodologies that could make me more effective. The course met 2 evenings a week for 8 weeks starting in October, and I found that I was actually good at the material when I wasn't constantly hearing Mom's voice in my head, telling me I wasn't smart enough. When I mentioned the course at Thanksgiving dinner, Mom said she was proud of me for investing in my career development. The words felt strange coming from her mouth after years of hearing that I was the disappointment who couldn't do anything right. I could tell she was genuinely trying because she didn't add any comments about how Bethany already had project management certification or how I should have done this years ago. She just said she was proud and asked what I was learning, and I gave her a brief answer about different planning frameworks. Dad smiled at me from across the table, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was, that this small moment of Mom being supportive without criticism was something we'd waited 20 years to see. Julia and I grew closer through this whole process in ways I hadn't expected. She called me twice a week just to check in, and we started meeting for lunch on Saturdays at different restaurants around the city. She helped me recognize my own strengths that had been invisible under Mom's constant criticism. I was good at my job, and my boss had told me multiple times that I was reliable and thorough, which I'd dismissed as basic competence instead of recognizing it as actual skill. I was financially independent despite Mom's claims that I was barely surviving, paying my rent on time every month and building savings even if my apartment wasn't as fancy as my sister's places. I had friends from work and my neighborhood who invited me to events, and genuinely seemed to enjoy my company, which meant I was likable, even though Mom had convinced me otherwise. Julia pointed out specific examples of times I'd helped her through difficult situations, or made her laugh when she was stressed, and she said those qualities made me a good sister regardless of how Mom had framed our relationship. The recognition of my own worth was slow and uncomfortable, because it required dismantling 20 years of Mom's programming. But having Julia consistently reflect back my positive qualities made it harder to dismiss them as meaningless. Dad started calling me every Sunday evening around 6 o'clock in early April to give me updates about Mom's progress in therapy. He told me during one of these calls that his marriage was slowly getting better as Mom continued her twice-weekly sessions with Dr. Simmons, and actually took responsibility for her past behavior without making excuses or blaming me. He sounded cautiously hopeful when he talked about their relationship, but he was careful to maintain the boundaries Rita had helped him establish. And he made a point of telling me privately that protecting me was now his top priority, regardless of what happened between him and Mom. The shift in his attitude felt strange after 20 years of him choosing peace over my well-being, but I could hear genuine commitment in his voice when he said he wouldn't let her hurt me again. Mom had started writing me brief letters every 2 weeks as part of her therapy homework, short notes where she acknowledged specific incidents and took responsibility without justifications. And while the letters didn't erase decades of damage, they showed consistent effort that I'd never seen from her before. Bethany and Julia kept showing up for me in concrete ways, like helping me move furniture when I decided to rearrange my studio apartment, inviting me to casual dinners at their places, and texting me funny memes that had nothing to do with family drama. 6 months after the wedding reception disaster, I was sitting in my studio apartment that I'd redecorated with actual confidence, instead of the shame that used to make me apologize for my space whenever anyone visited. I'd hung artwork I actually liked instead of leaving the walls bare, bought a comfortable chair that fit my budget without worrying what Mom would say about it not being expensive enough, and organized my bookshelf to display my collection instead of hiding it in boxes. Mom and I had settled into a limited but civil relationship where we saw each other at monthly family dinners with other people present, and she was learning to ask me questions about my life without immediately comparing my answers to my sister's accomplishments. My sisters were actively making amends through consistent support that went beyond apologies, showing up when they said they would, and respecting the boundaries I'd established about my time and energy. I was building a life where my worth wasn't constantly under attack, and my choices didn't require defense, discovering interests and strengths that had been buried under years of being told I was the family disappointment. The damage from 20 years of being the scapegoat didn't disappear just because mom was in therapy and my family was trying harder, but I felt genuinely hopeful for the first time that we could function in a healthier way going forward. I was learning who I actually was when I wasn't spending all my energy defending my existence, and that person was turning out to be someone I actually liked.